Hello everyone, here I am ready to share what else I saw in August that I didn't already tell you about. Up first is a rewatch, 1954's Stranger from Venus. Helmut Dantine plays a Venusian visitor to planet Earth who bewilders the occupants of an English inn when he restores the victim of a fatal car accident, Patricia Neal, back to life. He then reveals that he's come with an important message for all the world's leaders, so naturally the government must interfere. The first time I saw Stranger from Venus was 6 years ago, October 2017, which means I did do a mini-review of it, although I had no recollection of that until the end credits, when suddenly I remembered struggling over the name Cyril Luckham. I don't recall anything else I said, and chances are nobody else does either, but I'll put a link to that video in the description if anybody wants to check it out. This film's oft described as a smaller-scale British version of 1951's The Day the Earth Stood Still, which is an apt assessment for many reasons, the biggest one being that both films co-star Patricia Neal as a woman who becomes fascinated with the kindly and attractive spaceman. Given that The Day the Earth Stood Still is such a giant in the realm of classic science fiction, Stranger from Venus has probably suffered from perpetual comparison, but it should be able to hold its own. It's a decent drama with good acting, nicely drawn characters, and a bittersweet element of romance. Helmut Dantine is a little stiff, as was his wont, but I haven't yet seen him in anything where I didn't find him appealing to some degree, and his foreign formality suits the character as well. I especially liked the people stuck at the inn, the owner with the lame foot, his daughter, and the witty doctor, played by Cyril Luckham, who says to the Venusian, "Either I'm drunk or you're dead." What I find disappointing is that it does lose steam in the middle, where a couple scenes get bogged down with dialogue. It becomes very dry, and both times I've seen it now, I've found myself nodding off at this same place. It's unfortunate because otherwise, despite the modesty of its budget and effects, it's a worthy, more intimate take on the extraterrestrial messenger idea. Movie number 2 is a Japanese film from 1967, Nihon no Ichiban Nagai Hi, or Japan's Longest Day. It recounts the events leading up to Japan's surrender to Allied forces and the outbreak of resistance from a small band of young fanatics who felt themselves duty-bound to fight to the very end. I am not ashamed to say I learned of this film's existence by looking up some of my favorite actors from the Godzilla series and trying to find out if they had worked with Toshiro Mifune. This is the most impressive cast of any Japanese movie I have seen. There's Mifune, Takashi Shimura, Chishu Ryu, So Yamamura, and then a bevy of actors I know from Toho's kaiju films. Akira Kubo and Yoshio Tsuchiya have significant roles, Akihiko Hirata plays a part, and I was delighted that even Hiroshi Koizumi showed up near the end. I had no idea what to expect from a Japanese production about the war's bitter end, made roughly 20 years later and told entirely from their perspective. I wondered how things might be presented, but I was surprised by how honest it was. It lays bare the deep feelings of dismay, disappointment, and heartache over their loss, but it also goes whole hog with its portrayal of the dissidents and their almost insane determination to keep the war going. There is a lot of dialogue, which means a lot of reading of subtitles, which I don't mind, but this was one of those times where I felt like, oh, this would be so much easier if I could speak Japanese. And this also has super titles identifying the players, naming locations, stating dates and times, and that brings up another connection for Godzilla fans. I realize now that 2016's Shin Godzilla was probably referencing or parodying this film, not just with the super title overload, but with the meetings adjourning for additional meetings, the nitpicky bureaucracy, and the formalities making everything take so long that issues aren't dealt with in a timely manner. From the very start, you have to work to keep up, and if you don't already know your facts, you might be sunk, and you barely catch a break for the entire 2.5 hours. Yet it's never boring. It moves. It's got gripping drama, it's intense, and it shakes things up partway with a shocking scene of violence. I was gobsmacked, but I really liked it. The whole movie, I mean, not just that scene, although it was one of those things that makes you go, what? I really liked the film, and I kept thinking about it throughout the month, which is always a good sign that we've got a winner. It was interesting and enlightening, and there was so much to take in. Being familiar with the big historical picture helped, and because I knew so many of the actors, keeping the characters straight wasn't too hard, but I definitely would benefit from seeing it again. I enjoyed it so much that I actually considered rewatching it just a day or two later, something I never do unless I'm reviewing the movie. I didn't have the opportunity, but I'll certainly revisit it in the future. Movie number 3 is a viewer recommendation, 1980s Folks, spelled with 2 lowercase f's.
Now you say it like a stutter?
No, just straight fun.
It's perhaps more commonly known as North Sea Hijack, and it stars Roger Moore as a covert agent whose crack team is called in when an international group of terrorists takes over a boat and a pair of oil rigs and threatens to blow them up. This was sold to me as not great or even particularly good, but entertaining, and I'd say it more or less lives up to that evaluation. Moore's character, an eccentric, cheeky, arrogant woman-hater, was the primary source of amusement. One of his earliest outfits did confuse me, though. He looked so like Professor Henry Higgins that I wasn't sure what period I was in. Mom was pleased to see an old favorite, David Hedison, in a supporting role. James Mason co-stars as the top naval man, and he does a superb job pretending that he doesn't like cats. Anthony Perkins plays the main villain, the head terrorist, and I have to admit, I didn't care for his performance this time. His characterization is twitchy and sarcastic, punctuated with outbursts of temper that made the whole performance seem kind of hammy. Sorry, Anthony Perkins. Also, there was something messy about the film. Not the story, but the storytelling. And I know I wasn't the only one who had trouble because my mom brought it up before I did. I don't think I'm going to remember this one especially well after I've posted this video, but it was mostly fun in the moment. Movie number 4 is 2012's Memorial Day. It's 1/3 World War II movie, 1/3 Iraqi War movie, and 1/3 heartwarming drama in which a crotchety veteran, played by James Cromwell, and his grandson find common ground uncovering his suppressed memories. It's got a timeline that jumps around quite a bit, and some sequences are flashbacks within a flashback within a flashback within a flashback. Yet, incredibly, it does not turn out to be that confusing, because each setting has a distinct look and set of characters. I will say, the World War II sections bore an uncanny resemblance to Band of Brothers in appearance, color palette, and in content. The story follows the same basic path. I don't know if they were suggesting that the character was a member of Easy Company or not, but it was noticeable. They did a good job casting younger versions of the lead actors. In Cromwell's case, he's played by his son John, who conveniently looks a lot like him. The strange thing about this movie is that it's rated R for violence and language, and there is quite a bit of carnage. Yet outside of some glimpses of gore and a few extraneous bad words and heavy thematic material, it looks and sounds and feels like a family film. It's a modest production, and it's a little corny at times, which makes it feel like a heavy-hitting Hallmark movie from 25 years ago when Hallmark movies used to have some substance. It just made me wonder who this is for, because it seems a little mixed up. The people who would like the corniness probably wouldn't appreciate the graphic content. The people who wouldn't mind the graphic content would probably be put off by the corniness. Editing Weaselberry just jumping in here to clarify that I have no problem with it being heartfelt and inspiring and emotional. It's mainly the stuff involving the other child actors that's kind of weak acting, weak dialogue, an amateurish vibe, you know. That's all. So, it has some bumpiness, but it was a pretty good film overall, and there's one scene that really tugs at your heartstrings. Movie number 5 is 1942's Random Harvest. Ronald Colman stars as an amnesiac World War I veteran with a speech impediment who walks away from the asylum where he's being treated. He's quickly overwhelmed by the outside world, but Greer Garson's warm, understanding stranger takes him under her wing. A favorite actor in one of his best films. You can't get much better than that. This was a rewatch, of course. As much as I feel pressured these days, and the pressure comes from myself, not from other people, to cross things off my recommendations list and limit myself to new-to-me movies, sometimes all I want to do is revisit old favorites, and Random Harvest, a bittersweet romance that makes me cry every time, is one of my favorite comfort watches. I reviewed it in 2021, which was not that long ago, and I don't know if I've ever shared how odd it is to watch a movie that I've already done an in-depth review of. I often fear that all the work I did to make the video will have sucked the life out of the movie, and I won't enjoy it as much. It won't hold nearly as much appeal for me anymore. But so far, that hasn't been the case, thank goodness. Actually, rewatching this, there were all these things that I noticed and I thought, did I talk about this? Did I notice that before? I can't believe I didn't mention that! Which I guess is a pretty good problem to have. From time to time, I choose to let you in on my actor crushes, new ones, old ones, evolving ones. But I'd like to set the record straight here. Ronald Colman has a permanent spot at the top of my favorites list. I've loved him for, 13 years? And we're still going strong. He is as scrumptious to me as ever, and no, it's not the mustache. I saw someone leave a comment once saying, "So you like men with pencil mustaches, huh? You like this guy too? You like that guy?" I think it was actually a couple commenters that went down that track, and it's like, no, that is incorrect. I like this man, pencil mustache notwithstanding. I do watch Random Harvest principally for him, but each time I see it, I am more impressed with how wonderful Greer Garson is. This is as much her movie as it is his, and they are perfect separately and they are perfect together. I also endeavored this time to pay more attention to the actors in smaller roles like Bramwell Fletcher and Reginald Owen. And something else I suspect I didn't give enough attention to in my review was Mervyn LeRoy's direction, and the music, and the cinematography. But if I devoted 2 full hours to talking about this movie, I probably wouldn't be able to cover everything. And I guess that's okay. Movie number 6 is 1970's Chisum, a viewer recommendation from way back when I posted that regrettable 5 westerns so good I stopped hating the genre video. I really don't like that video, and I wish people would stop watching it. It's just as well I didn't watch Chisum back then, because I don't think I was ready for it. I was just coming round to westerns, and I still believed that I preferred outlaw stories with shootouts and things like that over films about cattle rustling and land disputes. Chisum actually has a little of everything, focusing on a property war building between 2 men, one who got there first but is generous with his claim, and one who just showed up and wants to run the whole town. This Technicolor film was directed by Andrew McLaughlin. It stars John Wayne and a packed supporting cast of familiar faces, young and old. It took me a good 20 minutes to recognize Patrick Knowles. I didn't know he was still acting in 1970. I never did put it together that the crooked sheriff was Bruce Cabot. Richard Jekyll is quite detestable, while Andrew Prine got to play a nice, decent guy for a change. And according to the titles, there were 2 Mitchum boys, but I only identified one. There are 2 female roles of note. I didn't know the actresses, but they did all right. I hated their hairstyles, but that's probably not their fault. And it was a pleasant surprise to find out that real Wild West legends Billy the Kid and Pat Garrett played into this story. Editing Weaselberry here again to clarify that the whole film is loosely based on historical events. The protagonist, John Chisum, was a real person, as were many of these characters. I didn't know that when I was watching it. The scene stealer, though, was Ben Johnson. Yes, he's playing John Wayne's sidekick again, but he's really, really good at it. He's super likable, and he scores the most laughs. So last month, you might remember, I talked about Wagon Master, and I joked that I needed to do more research on Ben Johnson to determine how I felt about him. Well, it was partly a joke, but it was also serious, and I have been doing research, and my findings are highly favorable. By all accounts, he was one of the best, most decent men in motion pictures, an accidental star who was humble and honorable and honest, who chose to take no part in the yucky side of Hollywood, and everything I have seen and read and heard in the last few weeks has only made me like him better. I had seen a couple pictures of him in this movie, and I felt like, okay, he's older here, he's got a beard. I was fully prepared to not find him attractive in this movie, but man, he was charming, he was funny, still awesome to look at on a horse. His character is sage and a little curmudgeonly, but in a lovable way, like a cranky teddy bear. I had seen him in almost a dozen movies before, and I don't think he ever caught my eye until She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe, I remember years ago, he was featured on TCM's Summer Under the Stars, and I saw Mighty Joe Young, and then I saw a movie called The Train Robbers with John Wayne, and that was my introduction to Ben Johnson, and I did like him, I think, but it just didn't make nearly the same impression on me. But, you know, it checks out. I watch westerns now, I listen to classic country music now, 2 things I never thought I would be into. So, if I'm gonna add a cowboy to my list, I might as well go for the very best. Anyway, I enjoyed Chisum. It's an exciting film with an engaging story and a good score by Dominic Frontier. I did not care for the rapid zoom in on a focal point style. That is very much of its time. But other than that, I really liked it. And so did My Identity Crisis. Movie number 7 is 1944's Sunday Dinner for a Soldier, a pleasant wartime drama that stars Anne Baxter as head of a family of orphans living with their fiscally irresponsible grandfather on a houseboat. Baxter is big sister, mother, and father to her 3 little siblings, and frequently bears the uncomfortable burden of having to scold her grandparent for his poor judgment. Though they struggle to make ends meet, they are determined to put on a bountiful spread for a soldier on leave, and hijinks, mishaps, and misunderstandings ensue as they try to obtain a soldier and a chicken to feed him. John Hodiak plays the soldier, and it's an unusual role for him. I don't think I've ever seen him smile so much. It was kind of weird. A couple years after this, he and Anne Baxter got married for a time. Charles Winninger is good as the profligate grandfather, but my mom and I found it very easy to sympathize with Baxter's frustration. The cast also includes Anne Revere, Chill Wills, and child star Bobby Driscoll in one of his earliest roles as the youngest sibling. The film is clearly designed to show the simple, humble, happy kind of life that's worth fighting for. Baxter represents the perfect girl every serviceman should be dreaming about coming home to, and Hodiak represents the soldiers and sailors that every family on the home front should be endeavoring to support. Some might call it propaganda, some might call it a good old-fashioned, wholesome, idealized morale booster. Movie number 8 is 1961's The Flight That Disappeared. That intriguing title, promising a spooky plane disaster, is all it took to lure us in. The film itself wasn't quite what I had anticipated. It does have a science fiction fantasy element, but it leans more toward realism than sensationalism, and I wouldn't call it a horror movie. It's definitely low budget with a small number of modest sets and no big-name actors, but the story is straightforward and surprisingly intellectual. The film takes its time introducing the cast of characters, which includes a lady mathematician and a blind woman with a very considerate but mentally disturbed husband, and it draws the mystery out nicely. I'd rather not go into further detail, because not knowing where it was headed was half the fun. I'll just say I was a little underwhelmed by the reveal and explanation. But it was still a decent movie with a moody, atmospheric score that helps generate a palpable sense of foreboding. Movie number 9 is 1955's A Man Alone, a western that's a man-on-the-run thriller starring Ray Milland, who also directed the film. He plays a gunman who is accused of murder the night he arrives in a corrupt town. Taking advantage of a dust storm, he hides out in the basement of the sick sheriff and his daughter. This colorful film seems to mimic the John Ford look, but without the grandiose sweep. The scale is smaller, and the pace is slower, awfully slow in the beginning, and there are things I could quibble over, like the modern look of the kitchen set, and Mary Murphy's wardrobe of saturated colors, sweeping trains, and flowy nightgowns. Her makeup was a bit heavy-handed too, like they wanted the movie to be as colorful as possible to the point of exaggeration. But it was an engaging film with a good story about redemption and justice. It's got a strong cast. Ward Bond plays the ailing sheriff, Raymond Burr is the main bad guy, and Lee Van Cleef is his clandestine sidekick. On an additional note, the score was composed by Victor Young, and I liked it just fine, except one of the main tunes reminded me of Waltzing Matilda, and it drove me nuts trying to figure out if that was intentional. Movie number 10 is 2023's 65, that was an awful lot of numbers, which stars Adam Driver and Ariana Greenblatt as space travelers who find themselves trapped on a planet populated by ferocious dinosaurs that want to kill them. This one didn't do well. Critical reception was poor. A lot of people said it was stupid, but I don't know. I thought it was okay. I was sold on a dinosaur survival adventure with a man and a little girl trying to get from point A to point B, and that's what I got. It definitely has elements lifted from other movies, so I can't say there's anything original about it, but I wasn't expecting originality. Maybe I've just set the bar so low. By the way, one thing that I noticed, and I wish I could play a clip from the movie, but I can't rip stuff from Blu-rays, is that after the crash sequence, as Driver's character is waking up, there's a pulsing, buzzing noise in the background, and I am pretty sure that sound effect came from 1953's The War of the Worlds. If anybody can confirm or deny this, or at least say, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about, I thought the same thing, that would be great. One criticism that got a lot of circulation is that the premise should have been held back as a plot twist. But again, I don't know. Maybe the people who said that are right, maybe they're not. I was surprised by how heartwarming the film turned out to be, and maybe that sentimentality is another thing the dude bros out there thought was dumb. I was thrown off somewhat when the music became cutesy and things turned playful, but ultimately it worked all right. Could the movie have been better? Probably. Will I remember it in 3 months? But it was a nice story with some feel-good moments, and the acting was fine, and the effects were fine, the dinosaur designs were pretty cool, there were some jump scares that got me, and I really don't have that much to complain about. It wasn't great, but it was alright. For number 11, we've got another rewatch of an old favorite here, the 2005 miniseries Bleak House, the 8+ hour-long adaptation of the epic novel by Charles Dickens. I love this. It's one of my favorite costume dramas and one of my favorite miniseries. I reviewed it in 2016, and I admit I've always been dissatisfied with that video because it's so short and I feel like I didn't say nearly enough. But back then, I typically wasn't going into as much detail in my videos, so it was more of an overview and introduction, and also, the brilliant complexity of the interweaving plots makes it difficult to discuss without giving too much away, and where this is a story full of surprises, I certainly don't want to take anything away from anyone who might choose to check it out for the first time. I know this adaptation has its detractors who prefer the older version, which I reviewed a few years ago, or who dislike the changes from the book, or who dislike some of the more modern touches, but for me, this one is perfect mainly because of the casting and characterizations. It never gets stale for me because the people on screen are so interesting and so diverting. The characters and their interactions are an endless source of fascination to me. There are really good people who you love to love, and really bad people who you love to hate, and every performance is golden. Bleak House is a legal drama, it's a murder mystery, it's social commentary and delightful comedy, it's an exploration of what determines our identity and destiny, and it's an examination of the various forms of love and charity and nobility. I just love it. My mom loves it. Even my dad, who doesn't usually go for these Victorian things, he gets a huge kick out of it. I got my brother into it. It's got something for everyone, and I can't recommend it enough. And if you feel really ambitious, you should read the book, too. And movie number 12 is another rewatch, 1994's Speed. Keanu Reeves, Dennis Hopper, and Sandra Bullock star in this action thriller in which a bomb has been placed on a bus in Los Angeles. If the bus goes below 50 miles per hour, the bomb will explode. I saw Speed many times back in the day, thanks to my mom's Keanu Reeves phase. This is one of her favorite films of his, and there was a period where she played it over and over again. It had been a long time since I last saw it, though, and I was curious how it would hold up. Good news, it holds up very well. It's almost better than it has any right to be. Yeah, it's got the classic markings of a 90s blockbuster, but it's an incredibly fun, exhilarating ride. This is where Reeves proved his capability as an action star, and his character is a believable and extremely appealing hero. Bullock holds her own behind the wheel, and the two of them have great chemistry, and Dennis Hopper's maniacal terrorist is just popping memorable lines right and left. He makes the most of every scene and every bit of dialogue. I had forgotten how much humor there was in this, and as a kid, I'm not sure how much I appreciated what they had to do to film some of these scenes with the bus plowing through Los Angeles traffic. I'm glad it's still as good as it was before. Sometimes when you revisit something like this, you're in for an unpleasant and embarrassing surprise. But in spite of a couple cheesy moments that, let's face it, were cheesy before too, I found Speed to be every bit as enjoyable now as I thought it was then. And that's what else I saw in August. I hope you enjoyed this collection of mini-reviews. As always, you can find a list of the films and how I watched them, along with links to any related videos in the description. Please share your thoughts on anything that I talked about in this video in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.